Entrepreneurs, authors, and aristocrats. If it hadn't been for a few chance encounters, the Titanic's 1912 sinking might have cost us some of the most well-known people and chocolate of the century. Milton Hershey founded the world-famous Hershey Chocolate Company. Born in 1857, he started the legendary business in the late 1800s. He was inspired to develop the product after seeing the Swiss style of milk chocolate at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Soon, now iconic treats like the Hershey Kiss were rolling off the line, and Milton Hershey became extremely wealthy. Incredibly, he and the RMS Titanic almost came colliding together in 1912, just when his business was really booming.
In the early 1900s, chocolate was really a luxury item.
Due to their wealth, Milton and his wife Catherine Hershey traveled internationally very regularly. While visiting Europe in April 1912, Milton planned to return stateside for business and was going to set sail on the Titanic. Luckily for him, fate intervened. He was planning on boarding the Titanic during its stopover in France and had already placed a deposit for his spot on the vessel when his plans abruptly changed. He was needed home sooner than expected, or a business emergency, and the Titanic would not get him there in time. Instead, he ended up leaving on April 6th aboard the SS America. Cognizant of their incredible luck, Lancaster history reports that Catherine later wrote to her mother-in-law that she felt God's hand keeping them safe throughout their many travels. While he's famous for his work in the steel and financial industries, many people do not know that John Pierpont Morgan, better known as JP, actually played a significant role in the building of the RMS Titanic. Through his International Mercantile Marine Company, Morgan actually owned White Star, the shipping line that built the supposedly unsinkable ship. Morgan had built his wealth in the 19th century by working in the banking and railroad industries, and he eventually created the General Electric Company through a merger. By the time the Titanic was set to sail in April 1912, Morgan was undoubtedly one of the richest and most powerful men in the world. It's little surprise, then, that Morgan would have been scheduled to take the magnificent Titanic's maiden voyage. In fact, he probably would have been on the ship as planned if it had not been for the United States laws concerning importing art. As Bradford Matson wrote in Titanic's Last Secrets, Morgan had a huge collection of various art pieces throughout Europe and wanted to bring them home to take advantage of America's newly lowered import duties. He was all set to take the Titanic, but the month before it was scheduled to depart, Morgan made the decision to stay in France and oversee the art arrangements himself. Morgan ended up dying less than a year later on March 31st, 1913 in Rome, Italy at the age of 75. Guglielmo Marconi was a man of many talents and, as it turns out, many connections to the RMS Titanic. Born in 1874 in Bologna, Italy, Marconi's most valuable attachment to the Titanic was the wireless telegraph system that he created. The Marconi telegraph was the first wireless telegraph ever invented, and it would go on to have revolutionary implications for the future of long-distance communication. Marconi came up with the invention in the mid-1890s, and by the 1900s, British battleships were already using it. Marconi was able to demonstrate the telegraph's viability over increasingly bigger distances, and in recognition of his work, he won the Nobel Prize in 1909. Marconi and his wife Beatrice were invited on Titanic's maiden voyage when it departed in April 1912. However, according to Guglielmo's daughter, he ended up on the Lusitania instead, because he preferred its stenographer. At the time, Beatrice was still planning to take the voyage, but their son became ill, thus canceling her trip. She and their daughter actually watched the Titanic set sail from the docks at Southampton, England on April 10th. Even though Guglielmo Marconi was not on board the Titanic himself, his wireless telegraph machine was. When the Titanic went down, its officers desperately tried to relay for help by transmitting to other nearby ships. Marconi's telegraph undoubtedly helped save the lives of those who survived.
When the Titanic sank, 700 passengers owed their lives to the SOS message broadcast by the ship's radio operator.
If it weren't for steel and coke magnate Henry Clay Frick's daughter, he may have been one of the 1,500 unlucky souls to have perished in the RMS Titanic disaster. One of the wealthiest patrons to have almost boarded the Titanic, Frick made his money through various mining pursuits, first with the Carnegie Brothers and then with the United States Steel Corporation. According to Quentin R. Scrabeck's book, Henry Clay Frick, The Life of the Perfect Capitalist, Frick, his wife Adelaide, and his daughter Helen were all supposed to take the Titanic back home stateside stateside from a European vacation they took with respected financier J. Horace Harding's family. According to the New York Tribune, Frick's daughter fell ill just prior to the Titanic departure date, and it forced both the Frick and Harding families to postpone their return. Instead, the Fricks took another vessel back, which some believe to have been the RMS Mauretania. Frick ended up giving his tickets away to J.P. Morgan, who we know also declined the voyage for personal reasons. Usually, when your employer decides they want to spend less money on your accommodations, it's a bad thing, but not in the case of Theodore Dreiser. Dreiser was a famous novelist, most well known for his books Sister Carrie, The Financier, and An American Tragedy, and he was nearly a passenger on the Titanic. Though he never purchased tickets, he was infatuated by the massive vessel. According to Jerome Loving's book, The Last Titan, A Life of Theodore Dreiser, the author had left for Europe in November 1911 to do research for a new book. He was accompanied by Grant Richards, an English publisher, who helped him get backing for his new work from the Century Company. When Richards and Dreiser were set to sail back to America in April 1912, Richards had them take the Grunland instead of the Titanic because tickets were cheaper. While Dreiser was probably a bit annoyed at the time, it didn't take him long to realize just how lucky he was. For while still at sea on the Grunland, he got word of the Titanic's sinking. Dreiser wrote about his feelings hearing about the Titanic sinking in his book, A Traveler at 40. He wrote that he fell asleep mourning those who were lost in the disaster, and reflected that many of the passengers of the Grunland were on edge for the rest of their voyage. Few families in history have a name as recognizable as the Vanderbilts. As one of the wealthiest families in Western history, it's unsurprising they had a few connections to the RMS Titanic.
My family has 5 generations of senators. My brother's in the top 3 at Yale Law, and he just got engaged to a Vanderbilt, for Christ's sake.
Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, also known as AG, was born in 1877 and would later become the head of the New York Central Railroad. He was the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the most successful and powerful businessmen in American history, and he inherited a huge empire upon his father's death. However, AG's real passion was in horses, and he was a frequent attendee at horse shows and events. In April 1912, A.G. Vanderbilt was supposed to board the Titanic just a few months after marrying his second wife, Margaret Emerson McKim, in London. In fact, his mother thought that he was on board the Titanic when she heard that it sank. However, according to the Lewiston Morning Tribune, a few days later, A.G. got word to her that he was not on board. It's unclear why A.G. declined passage, but it saved him and his new bride from a terrible fate. Tragically, he would perish 3 years later in the sinking of the Lusitania after it was torpedoed during World War I. Reports emerged that A.G. acted heroically during the sinking, giving his life to save several children. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt was not the only member of his illustrious family to cheat death by declining passage aboard the RMS Titanic. A.G.'s nephew, George Washington Vanderbilt II, was also expected aboard the vessel. George Washington was William Henry Vanderbilt's 8th child, and he was born in 1862 in Staten Island, New York. He was an incredibly bright and talented individual and linguist who is largely responsible for the creation of the now famous Biltmore House and Museum in Asheville, North Carolina. In June 1898, he married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, a decision that would eventually save his life. Both GW and his wife were supposed to be on the Titanic, but it was his mother-in-law who ultimately persuaded them not to board. According to the New York Tribune, the Vanderbilts were already having their luggage loaded onto the ship when the elder Dresser begged them to reconsider. George Washington Vanderbilt and his wife made the decision to abstain from taking the voyage. Unfortunately, their servant Edwin Wheeler was not afforded the same opportunity. He was sent on ahead with their luggage and sadly died when the ship went down. If John Mott had gone through with his initial plans to sail the RMS Titanic in 1912, the world might look a little different today. Mott was a famous evangelist missionary who worked with both the Young Men's Christian Association, or YMCA, and the World Missionary Conference during his life. According to Charles Howard Hopkins in his book John Mott, 1865 to 1955, a biography, Mott was offered tickets and accommodations for the ship, but he refused for unknown reasons. The decision turned out to be a smart one, as Mott could have easily perished in the disaster. When he found out about the Titanic sinking, he saw his survival as a message that God wanted him to continue his life's work. After narrowly avoiding the Titanic, Mott would continue to spread the word of religion throughout the world. He earned a Distinguished Service Medal for his work with the government in World War I, and he later earned the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in the 1940s. Mott died in 1955 at the age of 89. Among the statesmen to have almost boarded the RMS Titanic on its fateful voyage was Robert Bacon. Bacon had served as both the Assistant Secretary of State and the Secretary of State under Theodore Roosevelt in the early 20th century. At the time of the voyage, Bacon had been acting as the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to France for several years.
Try saying that 5 times faster.
He was supposed to take the Titanic back to America to be recalled from his position, and his appointment as ambassador officially ended just a week after it sank. The New York Times reported that for whatever reason, Bacon and his wife ended up not sailing on the Titanic. They instead stayed back in France and were dining with the French president Armand Fallières at the Élysée Palace a few days while celebrating their good luck. They eventually made their way home stateside on board La France, and Bacon was immediately replaced by Myron T. Herrick as the new ambassador. After avoiding the disaster of the Titanic, Bacon would go on to serve in the U.S. Army during World War I. He died in 1919 while in his late 50s. Looking back now, it seems a bit peculiar that 2 of the RMS Titanic's biggest backers were both absent from its dreadful maiden voyage. William Pirrie was a Viscount and Baron and the owner of the Irish shipbuilding firm Harland & Wolff. He was also a part of Morgan's International Mercantile Marine, through which his firm got the contract to build the Titanic. He was one of the architects behind the concept of luxury passenger liners and built the Titanic's sister ships, Olympic and Britannic. As Bradford Matson explained in Titanic's Last Secrets, much like his colleague J.P. Morgan, William Pirrie was supposed to be aboard the Titanic when it left. However, while Morgan stayed behind to help move his art collection, Pirrie was unable to sail due to serious health problems. In the months leading up to the April departure date, Pirrie found himself getting sicker and sicker. He had multiple procedures done on his urinary tract to help ease his pain, but he was not able to recuperate in time for the Titanic. At the time the Titanic sank, Pirrie was recovering from surgery on his private yacht. Sadly, he ultimately perished at sea in 1924 while aboard the Ebro.